Okay, I'm really sorry that I can't patch in for a live Q&A session, but being down under, the time differences are reversed. So I'd need to, Skype in at about 4:30 in the morning, and I'm not sure what sense I'd be making at that hour of the morning. So if you have any questions about my work or research, then look, feel free to email any of your questions to me, and we can have a conversation by email. So my email address is larissa.sandy@rmit.edu.au. Okay. So Andrew sent me a couple of questions that he'd like to ask. And so the first question is, how can this research be applied or leveraged or utilised to policy or steps beyond anthropology? And so that's a really great question, Andrew. Thanks. Um, and look, for my work, I think it also sits in the field of applied anthropology. So I see the research having quite direct relevance to policy. So some of the really rich stories I was able to document can actually be applied to create evidence-based policy in the area, rather than policies that are based on myths and ideologies or anecdotal stories which are pretty patchy at best. So, how you might apply that in policy? Well, look, the first step would be to, use the research and draw from the research my examination of the diversity of women's experiences in the sector. And, in particular, debt bondage, which I shared some of that work with you in the webinar. And you can actually use these women's experiences to try and create multi-pronged strategies and frameworks. And you can actually develop these strategies based on harm minimisation approaches. So like for debt bondage in particular, we can actually try and, we can use the women's stories to try and tease out where some of the exploitation occurs. And, so I made that quite obvious. You have, exploitation occurring in the restrictions on freedom of movement, right of discrimination, and some of those aspects of heightened control by management. And you can actually develop strategies to address this rather than taking like a blanket approach to exploitation, or taking exploitation at face value. So what happens in a lot of approaches is that, the exploitation or the harm is believed to occur because it's sex work, so it's sex work full stop. Sex work is causing the harm. So then, the policy approach becomes the abolition of sex work in order to abolish the harm. So, what we can actually do, is look at what can be reasonably done to work with employers and brothel owners to try and counter some of those exploitative practices. And look, this is what happens in other approaches to labour exploitation. You work with employers and employees to try and develop models for the creation of safer working places, and measures to address and end abuse and exploitation in that particular labouring sector. But this actually isn't the case for responses to try and end abuse and exploitation in the industry. So the work could be taken as a possible pathway for trying to develop those programs that also try and meet some of the very diverse needs of sex workers, and start working towards developing fairer labouring practices and conditions in the sex industry. So then if you apply the research work to policy, as I've said, look, it really speaks for the need to develop multi-pronged strategies to respond to sex work and labour exploitation in the sex industry. So look, at a minimum, we would need to develop programs that are designed not only to help people in the industry, leave or exit from the industry, but also providing retraining and retraining programs so that they can make a living, using an alternative livelihood strategy. But these programs also need to be quite realistic in their expectations. They need to be delivered by highly qualified organisations and to, strong ethical standards, and by people that have appropriate qualifications and trainings, because often this isn't the case in the sector. Unfortunately, it attracts its fair share of what we could say are charlatans and zealots. We could also divert a lot of the funding in this war on trafficking to these efforts, rather than spending it on policing and crackdowns in the sector as well. And look, the research work really shows that if we take sex work as a form of labour, then we need to actually start developing programs that also assist sex workers to create safer working environments and avoid STIs and violence. And so also need a clear passage towards the decriminalisation of sex work, which is now recognised as best practice in responses to the regulation of sex work and in the minimisation of some of the harms in the industry as well. So in countries, say, Australia, some states have actually shifted towards harm minimisation frameworks and strategies. And this has led to the shifting of sex work out of the policing portfolio and into the responsibility of the health department. And as I've said, look, my research work clearly shows that sex workers view sex workers' work. So that would also include shifting sex work into the portfolio of the Ministry of Labour. But, look, I feel that this might be too radical a notion or suggestion for some people, but that is what the work clearly demonstrates. The other really big point to draw from my work, especially for policy, is the absolute need to involve sex workers in the policymaking process, as well as in the implementation of policies as well, and programs. And at the moment, it very rarely happens that sex workers are included in those processes. The other point is that policymakers and program frameworks and campaigns actually need to take greater care and concern towards some of the imagery that is utilised in the sector, as well as being critical of some of the knowledge that is also produced in this sector about the topic. These knowledges, I think, as I've shown in the webinar, are in no way neutral, and the organisations involved in the creation of those knowledges have a vested interest in shaping understandings and maintaining those as well. Okay. So the second question I'll now turn to, and so Andrew asks, how would a student interested in pursuing a similar topic begin? What are some good programs or organisations where people can work and learn? So my first point to suggest that would be, if anyone's interested in taking up this kind of topic in this research, the first place you can start is with your local sex worker organisation. There are sex worker organisations in almost every country in the world, and a lot of these organisations actually run on the smell of an oily rag, so they might welcome the chance for students to actually come and volunteer on some of their programs. And so here I can actually share my own experiences of how I became involved in this work and eventually carried out this oral history project. So I actually began working in the sector through volunteering with an NGO that was based in Phnom Penh, and they had a sex worker empowerment program that I was volunteering on. And so look, this volunteering work I did before my PhD, and I also continued to volunteer while I was doing my fieldwork as well. And look, the volunteering was actually quite crucial because, number one, it gave me links with very key local organisations, and that included some of the sex worker organisations that were based in Phnom Penh, and other local NGOs that were also working in the sector as well, and INGOs and health officials. The volunteering work was also a key for me to starting to understand some of the lived experiences of sex workers, and really coming to grips with some of their everyday concrete social realities, their lives. Um, so that early volunteering work, as I said, was quite crucial. So it also led to the genesis of the project, and identifying the need to document sex workers' life histories and experiences. So the volunteering also helped me see how sex workers' lives are actually much more complex than merely being victims that that we need to go and rescue. So it was quite transformative experience. And it also gave me the chance to learn more about women's working conditions and their motivations for entering into and staying in the sex industry. Uh, it also gave me the chance to learn how to talk with and work with sex workers in more sensitive and respectful ways, and also appropriate language use. And then, so that helped me start developing key skills in learning how to work with marginalised and stigmatised groups. The other thing that the volunteering with the local NGO also offered was the chance to learn how to apply my research knowledge and my research skills, which I'd gained in my undergraduate degree, in really practical ways. So one example I can think of was assisting in the development of a model for the regulation of sex work, and it was actually based on what sex workers wanted. So key there was learning to listen, and learning to listen to sex workers and to help translate what sex workers said would be the best ways for them to be able to work, and transforming these ideas into relevant policy frameworks that sex workers could then use to petition the government for legislative change and reform. So that would be my number one top tip. If you were interested in pursuing a similar topic, I'd look at volunteering with your local sex work organisation as one of that first steps in not only making those contacts, but also learning much more about the issues and becoming sensitised to that. So I'd like to say thanks, Andrew. They were great questions. And if anyone has any burning questions from my webinar that they'd like to ask, look, please feel free to email me, and we can continue the conversation via email. Okay. I hope everyone has enjoyed the webinar. I know that I've really enjoyed doing this and having the chance to share my work with you. And hopefully I look forward to sharing some of the results of my postdoc research once I complete data analysis and write-up. So have the chance to talk with you again in the future about the next stage of my working in Cambodia. And I'd also like to say, again, a big thanks to Andrew for giving me the opportunity to be able to share some of my research work with you today. Thank you.